Welcome, everyone. I know that some folks will still probably be coming in, but to respect everybody who has made it here by this time, we're going to get started. One of the absolute pleasures for me of working with and collaborating with folks like Saskia and Martin is actually what happens to my own learning. So when we started off this and we talked about the series that we were going to have around change ambassadors, we started with a few ideas. And what happened is we found that every time we had a conversation and then every time we ran a session, more and more ideas came to the fore. And so what I would like to do is just start today by saying, actually, this series is the complete embodiment of what we do in the Issoria community. I'm Ursula Erasmus. I lead the community and I'm a senior partner at Issoria with accountability for capability development. This community is one part of that capability development and probably the part that I think in some ways adds the most value. It's an incredible container for conversations like this, where we can bring experts together to share ideas, to answer questions, to build off each other, and actually just challenge some of the thinking. What I think you'll find again today is that organizations are really different, and so there is never a one-size-fits-all solution. Martin finds himself in an organization that I think is best served by more traditional approaches right now. And Saskia is in an organization that's had a fairly robust history of sort of growing its change muscle, some of which I've been a part of over the last 5 years. And so they are experimenting with a few new ideas. And the wonderful thing is we can pick up from both our speakers and everyone else on the call new ideas that might fit and serve what we're doing today. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Saskia and Martin back. And I know that they have so much to say. I am going to really try and reduce my own airtime today because they are the experts. They've really driven this process. And, you know, I know we've said it's a 3-part series, but who knows what the 3 of us might get together and do next year because we've had a lot of fun working together. In order just to cover a couple of housekeeping things, we're quite a big group on the call, so we will invite you to use the chat function to comment. We might have a couple of poll questions for you to help us understand who is here and how you think about things. And then when we see interesting things, whether they be your comments or questions, we may invite you to come off mute and take the mic for a moment. So please feel comfortable with that. It is really a safe environment. What we're talking about today is 3 things: why change ambassadors are important, how to be connected in a virtual world, sponsors, mentors, and change ambassadors being in sync. Oh, and actually a 4th thing is how can we look outside of our organizations or our standard way of working to bring fresh ideas inside. Now, I appreciate that that is a huge aspirational agenda. So let's see how we go on it. Without further ado, I'm going to ask a quick question to all of you, and I'd like you to pop into the chat. Have you ever been a change ambassador or a change agent? And if so, if your answer is yes, do you support or have you supported people outside of your geography? So we'll let you go into that chat function and answer that 2-part question. And while we do that, we will get ready to shift gears into thinking about connecting as change ambassadors in a virtual world. So at this point, Saskia, I'm going to hand the mic off to you virtually. You can look at the poll answers and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I love the topic of ambassadors. And we just at the start of this, we were reflecting a little bit like what happened over the year. And also in this series, I've learned so much from our conversations and from our fresh views from getting that outside. And one thing that I want to add for today, which I think is really important, and that is combining a number of the things of why are they important, how do you get those inputs, and also how do you do that in a virtual setting, in an aligned setting. And I think that trust is one of the key elements. And I think what you need for that is you need to be open. And I love that about this conversation, that we are here, we're coming here with an open mind to learn and to give. So there's already that two-way. And then I've never met Ursula in person. I've never met Martin in person. But when we actually connect online, we have that openness to each other, we respect each other, we build on each other's knowledge and backgrounds, and that creates a trust that then transcends, hopefully, in this community. And then, as Ursula said it at the start, this is a safe space. And the fact that there are so many people, there's some people even coming on camera, there are people sharing their questions, their experience, that's because the three of us start from a basis of trust and we generate that outside. So maybe that's a nice place to start.
I think that's fantastic. And, I'm looking at the answers in the chat and I see some folks have said, yes, they have been in the role, and yes, they have supported people outside of their geography. So Saskia, when we were getting ready to have this conversation, you had some ideas that you shared that within Philips that you actually use to keep connected change ambassadors across not only different regions, but also different parts of the organization, because sometimes it's geography, but sometimes it's also the structure of the organization. So
Absolutely.
I would love you to start us off by sharing some of those things that you do. These are really practical things that I loved hearing about.
Absolutely. So so I work for Philips. We are across many countries, many time zones, many businesses. And one of the things that we see is that people have different priorities also where they sit in the business. So we currently have a very wide network, about 300 people who are our movement makers or our change ambassadors. And the way that we're connecting with them is indeed a couple of different things. One thing that we really were passionate about is we have calls, right? Very simple. We've got monthly calls that we are also inviting leaders in. So it's a moment where we connect. We always make time to share like we are doing now, but we also always make time for the people to connect with each other, because that's what people want, right? They want that human connect that I started with at the start as well. So we've got big calls that incorporate small calls. And what we have there, and let me add my favorite GIF, we're adding a little bit of fun to it. And so we created the analogy of a giraffe. So we're calling us movement makers, and our analogy is a giraffe because we are sticking our neck out sometimes. So if I post this GIF of the dancing giraffe, everyone knows what I'm talking about. And that's fun, right? Yeah. It's a fun little thing, but it resonates and it goes wider. So a little bit of fun, calls, big calls, small calls. And what we did as well, we sent throughout the globe, we sent a book with on radical candor from Kim Scott. Great recommendation in any case. But we sent that book as a token of appreciation to our movement makers. And we included a little giraffe bookmark to keep the vibe going. And we use the giraffe in our calls. So that's how all of that is coming together. And it's a very simple thing, but because it's visual, it's quite strong.
I love that. I really, really love that. And thank you for the book recommendation. I put it in the chat, that just the name, because it's a good reminder for me too.
Absolutely.
Those of you who've known me for a while, I often talk about radical honesty. Same idea. We've really got to talk about what is. So Martin, the current organization where you're working as a consultant is quite different from Philips. How are you keeping your change agents connected?
Well, I really agree, first of all, with Saskia's statement about trust. I mean, trust is you make it or break it. For me, that's the number one health driver. But there are a couple of other health drivers which we can mention. I think what we need to put into context is what are the priorities of people about their jobs. So 10 years ago, and it's from Boston Consulting Group. In 2014, the number one priority was appreciation of work. Number two was good relationships, and number three was work-life balance. So if I see the giraffe, if you put that 10 years ago, it was much more easier for change ambassadors to connect. Because for me, a change ambassador, they have to be multi-talented, about trust, about resistance, how to reduce, how to boost adoption, how to bridge the communication, because sometimes the sponsor is not even appearing, he only talks to the project manager or the change manager, but not really to the audience. So things have shifted. And nowadays, the priorities are more about number one. And this is from 2023. Number one is now job security. Number two is work-life balance, okay? And number three is financial compensation. So now if you have change ambassadors doing a great job, and I'm an affected employee saying, whatever the program is, I just want to make sure my job is secure. Or as long as I'm well paid, either the program works or doesn't work because I earn a lot of money and I don't change my job. So the priorities have shifted. I'm not saying it's everywhere the same, but I think it's much more challenging for change ambassadors now in 2024 to address this topic. And I had recently a conversation with the chief HR officer of a company of more than 50,000 employees. I mean, she really knows what's going on. And she said an interesting statement. She said, we are okay about our change projects in terms of technical, in terms of what skills you need to drive a transformation. But because we have good L&D, we have good virtual trainings, we have on-site trainings, people are skilled. But what we are missing is the soft skills. And that goes back to, how are people self-confident? How do people communicate? How can you make trustworthiness? And those are the topics which Saskia mentioned in the beginning, meaning that I think that has been underestimated. And another point she mentioned was, I can see in one of the group division a higher sick leave than we should have. And we don't know why. So compared, and I did my research, you have like car company in Germany. They have a factory in Germany, in Poland and Hungary. And they're producing more or less the same kind of car. But the sick quote in Germany is much higher than in Hungary and in Poland, somewhere in between. So people are starting to questioning, is it because people are sicker? And I would say, no, not necessarily. But what is sick today is the attitude to work. That is kind of sick in a way that people do not see, why should I contribute? Because, I'm not happy about what I'm doing, or I'm not happy about all the time these virtual meetings. And we can come later to that, how to improve it.
Yeah, I think, Martin, you've raised some very interesting facts, data around these things, and it's been on my mind a lot. And I think just bringing it back to the conversation of change ambassadors, when I worked in an organization where my part of the organization was about 6,500 people, but overall we had about 180,000 employees across the globe. And I mean, I'm talking about 7 or 8 years ago, but I was aware of the fact that people's priorities were shifting. And I was also very aware of the fact that people were feeling incredibly pressurized, because somehow in the virtual world, and especially if you're in a global company, so many of you have said you support different geographies, that means your hours, even if you are working the same number of hours, they are spread out over a much wider period of your day. So instead of an 8 or 9 hour day, you may find that actually you're sort of on 16 hours to cover different geographies. And what I did is I started to think about how taking the role of a change ambassador would really convert into literally like money in the bank. So if you lost your job, or you decided I'm now a square peg in a round hole and I'm getting burned out because this isn't my environment, how could I take the the skills and the learning from being in that change ambassador role and apply them sort of as transferable skills to somewhere that suits me better. There are actually a couple of people on this call who used to be part of my team, and I'm sure they will remember those conversations and coaching that I gave. Because to me, no one should be asked to do anything in an organization that doesn't help their own individual growth. And I remember the last change ambassador call we had, Saskia, you actually were emphasizing how much you put into caring for those people who are designated change ambassadors and reminding them about their learning and how they can consolidate learning with their peers. So I think, you've reminded me, Martin, of the fact that it's not simply about a project saying, let's take 10 names or 20 names or whatever and put them on a project plan as designated change ambassadors. But we as accountable leaders need to think about how we can turn that experience into something that also works for them. So it doesn't just work for the execution of the project, but it needs to work for the individuals. And
100%.
the hopeful part of me wishes that if we could pick up that mantle as change practitioners, whether we're internal or external, as more evolved leaders, can we actually start shaping culture in a healthier way? So I love that you brought up those facts. Thank you for that, Martin. Saskia, I want to flip back to what you said about those, your calls that you had, and you said leaders came on them, which is interesting because one of the things we wanted to cover is how sponsors, mentors, and change ambassadors could work together. And for me, a leader is in that. So I would love to hear, how did you connect, or how do you connect your change ambassadors with others who can collaborate and co-create to drive an impact?
Yeah, I love that. And I think in the first part of this series, we also talked about how are you selecting your change ambassadors, right? So one of the ways that we have selected the group that I'm talking about now is these people were handpicked. Right? These were not nominated. They were not self-selected. They were handpicked by their leaders. So that already gives like a nice boost. That also links to what Martin was saying earlier. So we also asked our leaders to be very active role models as well, and we have change ambassadors from all different levels and areas in the organization. And the reason why we're adding leaders to the calls is to show leaders are people as well, right? They also sometimes struggle with showing the new behaviors. They try, they fail, they succeed, they bump into things. And by letting leaders share their real stories, that gives, I think, an extra boost to our ambassadors as well. And actually, it connects throughout the different levels of the organization. And it shows as well that we have ambassadors who are a formal leader, right? So they have like a hierarchical power, but we also have ambassadors that are just individual contributors. So they need to be able to inspire others through their stories. And one of the things that I really learned over the past experience with ambassadors is having that story matters. So if you build that trust that we were talking about, then having great stories, that is what will inspire people and to trigger people in doing great work. And in general, I think we have some awesome storytellers in our leadership.
That's amazing. I mean, storytelling is really the lifeblood of organizations, in my personal opinion. Martin, I just was monitoring the chat while Saskia was sharing, and there's an interesting comment from Daniel, and I wonder if you would like to pick that up with Daniel. Daniel says there's an issue with change fatigue, and not all companies have a program office to coordinate change initiatives to reduce the risk of overwhelm for stakeholders. So I think for me, there's a real tie back to the role of change ambassadors. But if you're up for it, Martin, I'm going to let you take this one away.
I think it's a very good question because a change ambassador cannot fulfill all the roles required. I mean, first of all, if you talk about sponsors, if you talk about mentors, stakeholders, the affected employee, I think change ambassadors are on the ground, really hearing the voice in each of the countries. Because in one of the global projects I was working, we had change ambassadors of all of Australia, the US, the Germans, the Swiss. So they knew what locally needs to be changed. But what we have been lacking, and this, this goes back to the question, is kind of a mentor role. And I think that becomes much more important in the future, because a sponsor at the end is accountable for the success. A sponsor should be the last point of escalation. If he can handle the issues or resources, you know, at the end, the sponsor maybe need to provide more resources. But what we need more in the future, and that comes also back to the change fatigue and soft skills area, is to have maybe an independent mentor who can also address not the daily firefighting, but let's say, okay, we have a person with a super low self-confidence, but she is extremely important as a key stakeholder in the project. And I think you can fix that one-to-one. You really can fix it by addressing, okay, what is the problem? How can we affect that? How can we change it? How can a mentor to provide guidance, to do some skill development, not to come with, okay, you need to do this training, but first to understand, okay, there are 50 solutions, and which one fits best to fix the problem now, not in 2 years. And I think this will become more and more important.
I think you're absolutely right, Martin, and it reminds me of a conversation I had this week where we were talking about this exact fact that, people feel very overwhelmed with the number of changes. And interestingly, a lot of leaders are not equipped to have conversations with their teams about not only what is, if you have a program office, great, because then at least you can see the list. But whether you see the list or not, there's also all the other small and incremental changes. And so maybe building the leadership skills around mentoring could be really helpful. So I love that as an idea, and may also help with that idea that there's change fatigue because people do not understand what is coming at them. They just feel that it's a lot. There's another.
If I can just add to that, because I love the mentoring part, and I think to complement what Martin just said, it's also for leaders and sponsors to then sort of tie that whole story together, because very often people on the ground, and I think that also is linking to the next question that's being asked, people on the ground, they might, or often they don't see the whole big picture. So I think one of the things that we try to focus on with leaders is to help people tie that story together. And also actually for change ambassadors, this is important because quite often as an ambassador, you are a little bit ahead of the curve, right? You know things a little bit earlier than others. And what in general, then you have a little bit of time to process it, to go through the change journey and come out of the other end. And it's important to then remember that the people that you're interacting with, they're still maybe at the start, right? I often describe the change journey as a wobbly bridge towards an end that might be in a little bit of a foggy area. And we're asking people to jump, right? To get on that wobbly bridge that looks scary. You don't exactly know what's on the other side, but it will help if there are change ambassadors or sponsors or leaders that are there and say, hey, come, it's safe here at the other side. It's fun. There's good stuff here. Let go of the old and come over. And I think that's really where tying that story together and daring to stand up and say, I think this is important. Come.
Yeah, I think you're very right on the money with that, Saskia. And I do think that without a good strategic change narrative, it's really, really hard. So for some of you might have attended our strategic change narrative workshop this week. Martin, there's a lot of things that have come up in what we've spoken about so far that are anecdotes, I would say, or reasons why change ambassadors are important. And I know that you have a fantastic list. sort of best practice. So I'm going to invite you to share that. I know you've got probably 6, 7, 8, 9 points, and I'd love you just to talk us through that at this time.
Yes, some practical points. Yes, I mean, one is that we had, this multiple time zones. So I had to change call in the morning about, doing the tests, doing the exercises with Asia Pacific. Then, of course, Europe could join. Then in the afternoon, it was US, Canada, LATAM. And we just realized that, for the Americans, it was kind of early morning. For the Asians, it was kind of late afternoon. And when you have all doing the same kind of topic to go through, do a test and so on, people, sometimes I say AFK. I say, what does it mean? It's Anforderungskatalog in German, but it actually meant away from keyboard. These people missed the part. So what we changed was, okay, we will make a video when we show the case where we need to change. So you guys test that and whenever you can, right? And it was very well perceived because we can't expect people in the US, when they come to the office, they have 50 emails and things to do. And then they say, oh, why should I do something which goes live maybe in 6 months? So that flexibility helped a lot. That is the first learning. The second learning,
bridging communication, right? You found
yes,
a way to bridge that
and
communication.
it was very simple. We had a big master Excel and we just made a link with the video and people could click on it and then update the Excel with done, or things we could address in the next meeting. But I think what we need to really understand is people from, after lockdowns and now 3 or 4 years later, CEOs think, okay, return to office, no problem, let's continue as it was. No, it's not like that. People are still suffering mentally from what happened. So I can understand change fatigue because what we learned during those times when we were forced to work virtually, the credo was like, okay, we need more communication, we need more calls, we need to collaborate more. And it's not working, right? That's why the fatigue stands. So we need to have fit for purpose meetings. Or a change ambassador can introduce new ways of working, saying, okay, calls maximum half an hour, agenda is a must, preparation is a must. So sometimes people come to a call completely unprepared. It makes it difficult because you waste also the time for the others. So what we introduced, and this was a super benefit, when I joined the project, I saw automatically 2 blockers in my calendar. And I told my boss, what's that? He said, that's the deep dive day. That's your deep dive day. Wednesday, Friday afternoon was blocked. No meetings, no interruption. People could work on their topics which they need to be concentrated. Because, change ambassadors are interrupted all the time. They have their daily job, plus on top, you can do 2 hours change ambassador per week. It's not like that. That's why you need to have a proper structure in place, but also, clarity of roles within a team, whether it's virtual or on-site.
Yeah, that's great, Martin. And actually, you've reminded me of something I thought about the last time we spoke. You are right about the fact that a change ambassador isn't a role that just happens in certain time slots, but it's actually a principle of the way you work. And apologies to all of the men on the call, but it's a little bit like being a mom with a young kid. You're just a mom. It doesn't matter whether you're working or you either have to be at the end of the phone or you have to be available and what have you. And being a change ambassador is a little bit like that because people look up to you. There is an aspect of the role that is kind of anchoring for everyone else. So you become a secure point, a place to either, bring your worries forward or bring ideas forward and so on. And so it's not something that you just turn off. It's you are or you are not, but it's not something you turn off. So you've reminded me of that. And I definitely love the idea of blocking chunks in the calendar for everybody, change ambassadors, change practitioners or not. Having dedicated time is really, really important. Saskia, is there anything else you would like to talk about why change ambassadors are really important? I know we've had quite a laundry list of things, but there might be some other things that are important to share.
Yeah, I think if I add to it, I think the biggest thing to me, what I often say, and I've in my previous life, I've also been a consultant, and in that you are always paid to think the change is a good idea, right? And also in my role as official change manager, project manager, change leader, transition, whatever you call it, it's your job, it's your role to drive the change. And I think the change ambassadors, even though they're stamped with that role, they do bring the real stories out. And I think that is so crucial for buy-in, um, two ways in, because very often I hear stories from my change ambassadors that I'm like, I never realized that that is how it actually works in the in the depth of things, right? Because however much I like to be in contact with everything, I am a little bit in an ivory tower sometimes. And when you then go and talk to real people, like your ambassadors, you actually find like, oh, so it doesn't work like this. It doesn't help if I make a big deck and then with all the steps. You actually just want one pager and maybe five different ones, but tick, 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 tick. Okay. And that to me is really, really helpful. And the other way around, it's also a change ambassador that can tell the regular people on the ground, why are you not trying it? Why haven't you stuck to the Wednesday afternoon no meetings? Why are you now blocking this? So
Right.
it's good to sort of have that two-way eyes and ears input that yeah, that's a little bit closer to the heart of people.
Absolutely. I think Daniel's question probably is for both of you, and is the role of the change ambassador or change champion recognized in performance agreements in your organization? So Saskia, you're an internal resource. Let me ask you first.
It's the best answer always. It depends. So I know in some areas it is, in not all areas. So this it's not something big. We don't want to have like a big program top down, and from that perspective, we don't mandate it from that perspective. But I do know some areas where it is. And one very minor example related actually to recognition is another of the networks that I do is my internal facilitator network, and I just trained a new facilitator, and she took the really great attitude of announcing that she was now an official facilitator to her line manager, their line manager, in two different directions, just saying, hey, I think this is really important. And she just promoted it. And I think that's not an official way, but an awesome example of collecting also your own feedback.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a real good example of self-leadership, which I always encourage. I think that's great. Martin, you've worked in a number of different organizations as a consultant. How have you seen the role of the change champion either formalized in a performance agreement or not?
That's a difficult question because it really depends on the company, as Saskia said. I think it's completely underestimated because it's very vague, it's very difficult. I think people are at the end overwhelmed with the workload. That was the major findings and conclusions we made. Can the people be a good change ambassador despite that the daily job remains? And what we corrected or raised when I was the change manager, also taking care obviously of change ambassadors, I see two aspects. One is to talk openly to the managers and saying, hey, it's not 2 hours per week. We need to find a solution. Let's say, can we stop some activities? And the other thing is to really support the change ambassadors in the mental attitude. I mean, if you can't manage your own mental attitude, how are you supposed to manage other people? And that's where I see the mentors coming in, you know, to make the people more, let's say, conscious in a very unconscious world. So these people start, you know, changing their minds. Then you change your behavior. And then if you are, let's say, in this area where you could even say there is nothing to achieve. I mean, don't get me wrong here. You are still achieving deadlines. You're still achieving your workload, but you are not so attached to what are the problems or what are you doing. That even means that you are okay. You go through an experience and I will have a good job later because, you know, I get all my connections. Of course, you can agree from the beginning what comes after if that role is full-time. But I mean, I even read the term perma-crisis, you know. I mean, you know, there is always something you can do. And I think if I was a change ambassador in a new project, I wouldn't too much care about what comes after. I would really make sure I'm in the present moment doing the best. You know, my credo is if I go to a meeting, make other people shine. If you
Love it.
go with that attitude, you change the whole room. I mean, people, even virtually, people see something is different, you know? And if you really see a person which is super difficult, sabotage, very bad attitude, now comes the hardcore. You could say, okay, every human being is an expression of God. You know, that maybe helps to overcome a situation which you don't have to jump on the spin, but you are completely okay with yourself and you can handle all these issues.
So I think we're hearing again, self-leadership is really, really important. And I'm going to offer a bit of a silver lining to everyone who's on the call. I had an experience. Wow. I joined Canada's largest retailer in the early 2000s to be part of a 10-year supply chain reimagination. And we literally touched every role in supply chain, right up to the people who put food on the shelves in the stores. So end-to-end supply chain. And I think everyone kind of thought that we wouldn't be able to do it. So what we were able to agree with senior leadership, working very closely with the CHRO, is that we would definitely be able to have this role professionalized and be included in people's job descriptions. So not as a full-time role, but it would be in their job descriptions and in their performance. And we had a bit of a sliding scale. So we sort of had, you know, the more junior, if you like, or people who were going to be expected to do a bit of a lighter touch, all the way through to the change ambassadors who are really going to do some of the heavy lifting with us. So the scale was, I think, 10% was the minimum assignment and 25% was the maximum across those sort of three levels. And the most amazing thing happened, that organization that I was part of was able to do something that had never been done before and has never been done since, because the CEO and his executive team put money where their mouth was and actually said, we do not want to reduce the number of people we have. We are going to hire in some temps during this period so that those outstanding people who are going to be change ambassadors can do the work we want them to do. And, you know, I've never seen that anywhere else in my career, but it was so wonderful to be a part of that. And at the end of it, what I was aware of is as the program was coming to a close, these folks who'd been change ambassadors were finding all kinds of new opportunities opening up for them because they had developed their leadership skills. They had developed their analytical skills. They were much, much better communicators than when they had started, etc. Plus, they were so well networked. Everybody in the organization knew them. So this goes back to my idea that, you know, taking the role on, and hopefully you've got people who can mentor and grow and support them. But we really should be encouraging people to look at this, even if it's not formalized, as a great growth opportunity. And so, you know, obviously, we've got to try and figure out what our organization can digest and accept, both budget-wise and time-wise and so on. But I think with people like us who understand the value, we can really try and make this a great experience for anyone that we either tap on the shoulder or who may show up. And sometimes they do show up and say, this is what I'd like to do. Let's help them really do that well so that they go on to great things. And the other thing is, anybody who's been a change ambassador and has seen good results will forever understand the value proposition of change management. So by default of doing the role well, we end up as change practitioners with a whole lot of people who really believe in the work of change. So I think that's super, super important. So just wanted to share that anecdote, and I think that answered a few folks' questions. I know Ibby had asked what the assignment was. I see, Julia, you've also included some great information there. So I wanted just to switch gears to one of the other things that we planned on our agenda to talk about is how do you get outside ideas or fresh thinking in? And in preparation for this, Saskia had some really radical thoughts, which in a way made me a bit envious. I was like, why didn't I think about that? And why was that not available to me when I was at that point in my career? So Saskia, over to you.
Yeah, so I have the luxury of a number of a bit out of the box kind of things. So I took a very nice training recently that was called Blow Them Off Your Socks. Of their socks. So that was one of the things that I did was, and it was on storytelling again. And what that learned me is how you tell a good story and how that also resonates with others. So going for a training outside of your company with other people that are outside your company, that gave me some really nice, fresh perspectives. So I think that's one thing that I really would recommend anyone. Another one, and Ursula, I don't know if I shared this, but this was a great one as well. I have quite some friends who are in more of an HR kind of role, even old friends like that I have had for close to 20 years. And recently I was a bit stuck, and I was meeting a friend over lunch, and where normally we would talk about private stuff, now because we were meeting in a work timing, we talked about work, and it was so much fun to talk about to talk with someone who you deeply know and trust about something that's completely out of their scope, but still get some fresh perspectives in. So that's another thing. And I think the third one, what we are doing currently with our team is we are also reaching out to others. As mentioned, I'm a former consultant. One of the great things that brings is that you actually have a great network. One of the people that I'm networking is here now as well. And you just reach out because everyone is having issues, having challenges, and sometimes it's so nice to again create a trusted environment where you can share your challenges, and then have that conversation very openly in a safe environment, and then say, hey, this is what we're trying to do, this is how we are building it, and this is what we're bumping into. What are you doing? And then they share, and then you find that there are things you can learn from each other. There are things you've tried that might need another go. So that was, I think, 3 very different, but all very fun things to do to get those perspectives in.
I love those. I really do. And I think for many of us in the cities where we live, there are also things like Pecha Kucha evenings. So you can go and watch people, or TEDx type of things. So you can go and listen and learn from other people. And every time I think we suspend our belief that we know exactly what to do and listen to other people, we find new ways to do what is being asked of us. Martin, what about you? Because I know that you are very cerebral and you're a great researcher. So how would you encourage change agents to get outside perspectives in?
Well, first of all, there is overall view. So just today, and that is an individual view. Overall view, I would say what really helps is just today, my boss shared our pulse survey of our big change transformation program with some rankings, and super good marks was about collaboration on colleagues. So it's a very, let's say, friendly environment. And people are still hardworking, but where is space for improvement is, for example, searching for solutions, and really agree and make decisions. So I think that's something where we can address a topic which we need to improve, and then have some individual training and guidance. Again, I would really recommend having a mentor to work one-to-one with the people. So about solutions, do we have obstacles? Do we have people who have big resistance to agree? Do we have too many stakeholders and so on? At the end of the day, it's about, how can you make a person to manage resistance in terms of, am I myself resistant when I get into trouble? Or can I have this new mindset saying, okay, the other one can do that, sure, but I'm not jumping into it, right? Or I say, I really want to empower other people to be fulfilled. It's just a different approach. So I think it's a lot about your mindset, a lot about changing behaviors. What are my habits? I mean, if you see people who always need to be right, as a change ambassador, I don't have to be right. Okay, it's your opinion, that's fine. But people who always want to be right, they suffer. So then you can get, okay, what can we do about suffering? Is it because they have fear to lose their jobs? Is it because they are not happy with themselves? So then you can start to work with mentors and address some topics to improve the quality of those people and eventually of the program.
Absolutely. All really, really good points. As we're going through this, what is coming to my mind is that the theme of storytelling keeps popping up, whether we're talking about sort of formally preparing those change ambassadors, whether it's the skill sets we're looking for, whether it is one of the primary requirements, and that's why we need them, is storytelling. And, my favorite quote is that the human brain is wired to respond to storytelling. So if we don't have storytelling in our whole system around change, we definitely will not get as good results as when we do have good storytelling. The other thing, I'm going to share a couple of perspectives that I really like in terms of helping change ambassadors get outside perspectives. I really also like to encourage them to look at anything that is offered by the OD network, so some little webinars and things like that, because one of the things that for those of us who've been practicing change for a long time, I think we know implicitly, and sometimes we forget to be explicit about it, but actually what makes us useful and successful and gives us resilience in our roles is the ability to work in systems. Because everything in organizations is connected, from your leadership behavior to your newest people, from literally your types of technology, from your functions and the process handoffs and what have you. But organizations are massive systems. They are like these cogs that constantly turn. And for those of us who've been working in change, 5 years or more, we don't even realize that our radar sort of looks at the system and sees, oh, here's some good stuff or good energy here or not. And so we get used to that. But when we bring change ambassadors into the fold or into the mix to help us deliver change, they've often been in a role where they've been very specifically trained, performance managed, and rewarded on looking at a very selective part of that system. And now all of a sudden, we're saying to them, we need you to do this stuff. And they don't really necessarily understand that if they can get out of that narrower box, and this is definitely not a judgment on them, it is part of their day-to-day role, and start looking across the system and looking up and down and so on, they themselves can find different things within their personality where they can influence and impact in a different way. So in other words, it's almost like breaking those boundaries away from them so that they can give themselves more permission to be really effective. And that also in turn means that then, the head of change or the mentors and so on typically have a little less to do, because the permission and the discovery and curiosity helps people find the way to perform in context. So I really, really like to do that. I like to get people the opportunity to learn a bit about systems and to observe. And I was not part of this, but I did hear this. It was just after the first lockdown in the US, and I think it took place in New Jersey. But somebody decided that those people who'd been working in change practitioners, change ambassadors, what have you, were suffering particularly because of the lockdown. And so apparently they hired a movie theater and they showed some kind of film. I don't know what film was. I can find out and share it. But they said, if you're a change practitioner, if you've ever been a change agent, whatever, you come to this movie. So they had, 480 people showed up at this movie. And then they had a reception afterwards to talk about what is the work of change. And really, I thought that was so brilliant, because whether you are actually a change practitioner and accountable for the change management of a program, whether you're the head of change, or whether you're a change agent taking on a semi-formalized or semi-professionalized role for the duration of something, we're actually all working in change. And so, all of the things that both of you have said is it's about having conversations around the work we do, just as we're doing here today, to figure out what else is there and actually to feel good about what we're doing. Because when someone says, hey, that's a good idea, then it really reminds us, oh, I've got this, I can do more, I can share, I can help other people grow. So I think, although the movie theater idea is probably not that practical now in the world where we're all back in our global organizations, there is always a virtual way to do things. So possibly sending out a link to something on YouTube and then having an online discussion might be another way to help have a conversation that is less rooted in the project and more rooted in, let's talk about what happens in a system. Let's lift our eyes above the horizon and really work to do this work in the best possible way. Do you know what is really shocking? We're at the 5-minute ending mark, and I always feel like the time is too short when we're together. Martin, I'm going to ask you for your closing thoughts, whatever has impacted you most or anything else you would like to share. Then I'll hand it over to you, Saskia, and then I'll wrap us up.
Yeah, I think systems is a good point you made, because in one of the projects I was working, I could see that, becoming a change ambassador from one country where the R&D and the manufacturing didn't even talk to each other. And for that person, that was the normal state. Whereas in another country, the manufacturing people could just walk into the R&D division and they were open. I would say hurt people hurt other people. Open hearts for other people. So that's, I think, the takeaway I would suggest. Yeah.
You're great with your takeaways, Martin. I love that. Open hearts, open hearts. I love that. I'm going to steal that.
Because if you leave this planet, you can't take anything with you. The only thing you can do is leave a good impact.
I love it. Open hearts, open hearts.
Yeah.
I think if I can add to that, I would love to reiterate, and I think that links perfectly with the open hearts, is the care part that we talked about earlier. If you, as change ambassadors, I think the best way to lift them up is if you genuinely care for them, because that resonates out to anything. So I think that's a really important one to reiterate. But I also want to shine briefly the light on, Ursula, what you just said, curiosity. And I think that is a skill that's often underestimated, because if you're truly curious, without judgment, without a preconceived idea about why people are doing certain things, that is a place from where you can then help people. So I think open hearts, care, trust, curiosity, I think that's some of the magic ingredients that will make your change ambassadors really radiate.
I think those are wonderful takeaways. So in the last 2 minutes, I'm going to ask everyone on the call, if you have any key takeaways, pop them in the chat, because it's lovely to see what you've really learned from this. And also, if you have any questions not yet answered, who knows, I might be able to twist Saskia and Martin's arm again in 2025 to do this. But I do know that Saskia said I have to meet her in person for coffee. So that clearly means I've got a trip coming to Europe. And you too, Martin.
Great.
You know, as we wrap up this, one of the things that I think is really important for us to always remember is that when we focus on the human side of change, and we really think about how does change emerge in an organization, you know, the human side of change as a change ambassador allows us to help people really understand how the parts of the organization, so the sort of operational parts of the organization and the human dynamics actually interplay. And so, you know, if we just focus on the human parts of change as a change ambassador, we can do so much. I think that it's really and truly important for us not to bog change ambassadors down with spreadsheets and, you know, loads of files and things like that. It's important to inform them. They definitely need information and data, but it's really important to allow them permission to be curious and build relationships. And in that way, I think that's where the real secret sauce comes around making a change work. And of course, it helps take some of the burden off people, leaders, and so on. So at the end of the day, good change changes culture. Thank you so much to everybody who has shown up today. I know there's consultants here. I know there's clients here. I know that there's Issoria colleagues here, so thank you to every single one of you who put time aside to join us today. And most of all, to my dream team, Saskia and Martin, it's been a pleasure. High five. Anytime, anywhere, I'll get on the Saskia and Martin show with you, because it has been a pleasure from the first minute.
Yes,
For everybody who's listening, we will send out, as we always do, recordings and summaries, and we look forward to welcoming you back into the community soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.